in any creative process, at a certain point, your work starts talking to you.
Hmm.
You probably know what I mean. It starts to tell you what it needs.
Sometimes it's not always good things or nice things.
No, you have an argument with it. It's like you look at the canvas and you're like, I'm good. I got an X-Acto knife here with a new blade.
I'm most definitely not in a 2 or 3 day stretch of that right now. Definitely not. I just I just murder things. I'll send you a picture of what I did yesterday. It's very cathartic.
Catharsis is good. I don't want to kill these frogs, man. I want them to. I
you
mean,
you say that. You say that, but you kept popping into the RPGs going, "Did anybody die?"
well, it's true because when you start thinking about these things, you start going for extremes in conversations. It's like, and it came up last night in the mod chat. I don't know, started wandering into something. It's like, hey, what's up? And then we wound up talking about like life and death and birth, and I realized, holy, we haven't we don't have a fertility symbol yet. So
Mm.
the tiara came up, right? The missing tiara. And I'm like, maybe the magic about it is that people believe that it makes you more fertile.
Frogland presents All Chill, No Shill, a podcast born out of the desire to hear more than elevator pitches. My name's Hazer, and I got a hell of a conversation for you today.
Who are you in the Discord?
Okay, I am Damon. I go by Bugs. I call myself Bugs because when I was a kid, I wanted to work for Bugs Bunny. Had some very interesting career shifts, but it eventually led to animation as an artist and technical director. One of the things I learned to discover about myself is that I am a writer, in a lot of ways. I love to draw. I love to paint. I love to animate, but writing comes out of me pretty naturally. And so I developed more and more of those skills over the years. And one of the reasons I was brought into Frogland at the project was to contribute narrative structure and story ideas as the world grows and the origin story develops from where I had started it. Um, so that's who I am professionally.
Awesome. You had a goal that you shared with me once. I believe it was 25 stories in 10
Oh
years.
yeah. So yeah, when I kind of accepted that, I mean, the thing I would encourage everybody to believe is like, you never know what life is like a box of chocolates. So so uh and because I worked at a studio that was run by Robert Zemeckis, I feel obligated to quote those movies. I guess there's a lot of ways people experience this. The way I've experienced this whole kind of bucket list concept, I'm not into it. I understand why people are. I mean, I want to see the world too and all that other stuff, but it became about what I could create before, the inevitable. And at some point, like about 10 years ago, I came up with the thought, it's like, I want to write 25 stories in 25 years. Um, and so that became one of my big ambitions. And so because I had begun in the world of movies, I started writing mostly screenplays. And you'll find out that when you interview Anthony, aka Shrimp, on our Discord, it's like he and I have a creative relationship going back to when he and I met at Disney, like a dozen years ago or more even. And we were working like crazy hours doing all kinds of stuff, but we like would take breaks and then like write screenplay stuff together. And there was a moment where, when you write screenplays as a means of telling a story, first of all, it's a very valuable thing to do from a writing exercise point of view. So I highly recommend it. The cool thing about screenplays is that there's a whole bunch of stuff you don't have to write because the only thing you can write is what the camera sees or what people can hear. That's it. You don't write what's happening in people's minds. None of that. Um,
Like, thank God.
yeah, right. Here's the way I think about it. I mean, a lot of people in film will say that historically, film peaked the day before sound was introduced because what film had to do before sound was introduced is tell a story entirely visually. That's
Hmm.
it. The whole music thing, the title cards, doesn't matter. That was such a minority part of it.
Hmm.
But to create a story that is structured entirely visually, um, that's an art that gets lost again. It's like it developed and it got lost. I mean, it already originated with painting because paintings are still images that tell stories if you know
Yeah.
them. The issue with visuals is that it's a feed the beast problem. We
Hmm.
cannot have enough, and generating them quick and dirty and fast and cheap and out of control, you can do that.
So why are you doing this?
Well, I'm doing this because it's an opportunity to write in a very different modality, and to interact with people who are interested, and to experience the involution, the inside out process of what I've always known, which is you create something and you expose it to an audience. This is you create an audience first. It's weird. I mean, when you break it down, right, in the whole NFT thing, it's like we had an audience before there was a product. It's like people like are like like, well, this is interesting. People are interested even before there is anything, and then which adds a certain kind of like like energizing quality. And so, once I realized that, I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is going to be like how to like get. Uh, it's almost like performance art.
Hmm.
And I think that's the reason it appealed to me. And my pitch was like, we are literally going to have to make shit up as we go along, until it is made in a way that it starts to have a life of its own. And then we are going to have to listen to, we're going to have to listen to what we created, because this wasn't just like a build it and go. This was like build it. Now we're going to invest in this next phase of building something. It was very important to us to like take art that Dee had created. We needed to plus it, right? Because when you work in the professional like entertainment world, it becomes very much about not only architecting an important thing, but you gotta plus it, which means that you have to put other ideas into it that add and pile up, and people don't necessarily see them, but but it makes a difference. And so that had to exist at two levels. One was the emotion, and the other was the art. And so the way that Shrimp and I, worked together is we architected the emotion and the quirkiness of these beings, these frogs, by having them with the facial expressions they have, the eyes they have, the clothes they wear, and so on. His expertise in visual effects, it has this polish which very few people notice, but they do, right?
If there's enough comments on it, I want to get you and Shrimp on to do one of these just specifically about
Sure.
the frogs, because I think that'd be a really cool one. Because there's
Yeah.
so much behind those. It's insane.
Yeah, I'm a very big supporter of that idea because I think it will be interesting, but I think also internally I think it will be important because I think we're at a point where one of the things we have to be reminded of, and I know this from the internal discussions we have, it's like, okay, we've got a thing, we've got enough of, we've set aside enough of it, funding wise, to start creating this next level of world building, right? We have to get back to the characters,
Hmm.
or character. And so those frogs are up and coming in our minds, and ready to be diversified and spread through much more than, I mean, everything that people project into them or want from them. We have to start listening to the frogs now, which is an interesting process, in any creative process. At a certain point, your work starts talking to you.
Hmm.
You probably know what I mean. It starts to tell you what it needs.
Sometimes it's not always good things or nice things.
No, we can have an argument with it. It's like you look at the canvas and you're like, I'm good. I got an X-Acto knife here with a new blade.
I'm most definitely not in a 2 or 3 day stretch of that right now. Definitely not. I just I just murder things. I'll send you a picture of what I did yesterday. It's very cathartic.
Catharsis is good. I don't want to kill these frogs, man. I want them to. I
you
mean,
you say that. You say that, but you kept popping into the RPGs going, "Did anybody die?"
well, it's true because when you start thinking about these things, you start going for extremes in conversations. It's like, and it came up last night in the mod chat. I don't know, started wandering into something. It's like, hey, what's up? And then we wound up talking about like life and death and birth, and I realized, holy, we haven't we don't have a fertility symbol yet. So the tiara came up, right? The missing tiara. And I'm like, maybe the magic about it is that people believe that it makes you more fertile, more likely, more fecund, more likely to have children. All those things that are ancient, mythological, mystical things where you're like, I mean, it's in every fundamental literature everywhere. Just the whole importance of being of procreation, right? You need death, but you also need, you know, the life force, the birth,
the balance,
the balance, right? So how that's going to express itself will be interesting. I mean, because I think these frogs, what they are, they do want connection. They may want dominance because of the whole Notorious thing. They may be good, they may be bad.
Could be a mix. Actually, I guarantee it'll be a mix.
It has to be a mix. It has to be a mix. But everybody wants to be recognized and seen and heard.
It takes a lot of introspection to figure out how you as a person operate. And even then, it's still pretty muddy. But what I think would be amazing is, given the opportunity to connect more without geographic boundaries, I think it would be really cool for people to start learning how to connect better. Like a small town, like where I grew up. You're going to bump into people and you'll learn stuff by bumping into people. I don't know. I've always been like a fan of the future, or like looked forward to the future, as in, I don't think it's going to be a place where everything is burnt and dead and you know, dystopian. It's a fun fantasy, but I don't. It's not where I think it'll
go.
Fantasy,
the negative fantasy has entertainment value. Yeah. I hear what you're saying. I mean, actually, I'm really glad you brought up those small town things. I think that that's a really important concept. It's been very difficult to, I think, really integrate this. Because one of the fantasies, right? I think that, and this is going to come up with the whole land distribution process, right? And the land, as the land comes into be something, another ownable thing that actually correlates to a place, you know, and eventually will have not, I mean, that will have qualities and attributes to it, and eventually will have a very specific coordinate, you know, all that. There is this idea that came up very early in the conversations in the Discord, right? It's like, well, where do you want to live? It's like, I want to live next to my friends. Because in an ideal world, the neighborhood that we all live in, you would want to populate it with everybody you care about. Now, that's a cool idea. However, then you get to the whole issue of like, well, at what point do you just start excluding people? And like one of the crises of society now is like inclusion versus exclusion, and exclusion somehow becomes weirdly acceptable, and that's not okay, you know. Inclusion is also always good. Exclusion is 90% of the time is bad. So this whole small town effect is like, well, maybe, you know, the real world, the physical world, which we never want to give up, right? It's always going to be weird. You know, you're going to have your neighbors. Some of them you're just going to say hi to. You're only going to see when you take out the garbage. You know, others you'll be friendly with, you'll borrow tools from, whatever. Maybe you'll have a drink or two with them, but you know, they're your neighbors. They're not your family. They're not your friends. Sometimes they are. It depends a lot on urban design and other things, but it also depends on the nature of the society and the town. And we all are missing, however, this idea of being in a small town. Everybody wants a certain amount of anonymity or privacy. I mean, that's normal. However, we also want to be able to reach out immediately, like you could literally, the fantasy of the small town, because small towns work both ways. The fantasy of the small town is you open your door, you talk to Fred.
we don't lock doors where I'm from.
Yeah, and I know that you had a very interesting historical moment, you know, where you're describing like the connections there that you're, I mean, you can talk about this or not. I mean, obviously, but I thought it was a really interesting thing. This idea of your dad being somebody who people knew,
Oh yeah.
Somebody who has a legacy, like a history, and is part of the history of the land where he was, where you are, and that there was a certain kind of social glue that he was, and
Mm-hmm.
that it's a double-edged sword, right? It's like people love you, but they also want to be attended to by you, which means that you have to pay a lot of attention. When sometimes you would really just like to just go home and get in bed.
Yeah. And maybe that was the thing. In a small town, you never had to think about it because you were just like you interacted with your family. I saw everybody. I went home after school, went to the office. Dad, my aunt, and like the rest of my family kind of was tied to that. They'd be in and out. And so it was never there wasn't like a structure or an organization built into
Yeah.
like keeping in touch with everybody.
Yeah, that whole out of sight, out of mind thing. And the desire to kind of turn that switch on and off, right? And that you, you here's another thing that goes back to your earlier question about, like, seeing kind of like something cycle around again, right? Here
Mm-hmm.
here we go again. Like, here's this comment. Well, that idea of belonging, once transportation got to the point where families, like, weren't like spending their entire lives within 10 miles of each other, and you could literally have people across the country, across the globe. We're not interplanetary
I'm the
yet, but
first generation of my family to do that.
to do what
It,
specifically?
to live more than 10 miles away
See, there you
since they
go.
came to America, basically.
More than 10 miles away, right? So, whereas others are just like, oh yeah, man, it's like, yeah, as soon as I could, it's like, yeah, I'm like 6,000 miles. I was like, what's the polar, what's the antipode, right? The earth is 24,000 miles in circumference. I want to
Well,
be 12,000 miles away from you.
so
So,
here's the weird thing. Did I tell you that I have divorced parents. So I grew up doing summers in Tampa, Florida,
oh
winters in
wow.
Montana.
Oh Jesus.
So at no point can
Wait,
I
that makes
not.
no sense.
I know, it's completely backwards. I used to joke, I
Well,
was
for
like,
me,
I can scuba dive and snowmobile. It's great. I loved it as a kid. I was fine with it.
oh, that's the title of your book right there. Scuba diving, snowboarding. Scuba
This is
dive,
why I got
snowboard.
compulsive hobby adoption.
Yeah, well, I can understand. I mean, that's all really cool. I mean, and it's relevant because I'm very curious about, like, how, the sustainability, right? This is all, everything ultimately is about sustainability. you know?
Yeah.
And so, the social glue, in this, that social pillar I keep referring to. Here's the thing, it's like, the thing that I'm least worried about is the quirky adventure part, because there's a lot of material there. And when you're talking about co-creation, we can mine human beings' experience like yours, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it's not like, I don't mean mine like extract. That's part
No,
of the
no, no. But
problem with
it's yeah,
language
yeah.
here. But
It's
there's a lot of material to draw upon, including everything.
it's not extractive. It's nice to be able to share your story and like with somebody that does have a background in writing something like that. I feel like anyway for me, I can hear somebody else's story and then it's a creative spark to like expand on it, which is really cool. Whereas like when I'm talking or trying to write about even my artist statement, it is like I would almost rather just be stabbing myself in the leg because I don't like it's the opposite of a spark. It's like you have to constantly keep like putting gas on the fire to even get a thought. Whereas like in conversation, it's fun to chat about, but if it's just a conversation with a paper, for me, it's horrible.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, that is the word. I mean, I use that word very
Mm-hmm.
deliberately in that the medium piece, is that the essence of all this is conversation.
Yeah.
And sometimes that conversation is about creative, interesting stuff, sometimes about very personal stuff. I think one of the things that we're confronting here historically
Mm-hmm.
is that we are looking at a time when we are going to have to accept that there's a difference between financial capital and social capital, and that those both can have inequities built into them, right? And that being cool, that's social capital, right? And I think one of the strange truths of things that I've observed, and I'm not trying to be kind of like agitating, although that is kind of my nature.
You're welcome to.
Well, I think one of the things that we all struggle with is that when we see people, I mean, like the financial stratification of society is a big issue. It's on people's minds, right? And it wouldn't be if we hadn't hollowed out the middle, because the middle's been hollowed out, and that's a huge issue. And I think there are very few people in this space that would argue against that. They may argue the details or the politics of different methodologies and approaches to solving that, but
how it happened, but not that it happened.
Exactly. It's like, this is a huge problem. It's a huge problem for all of us. It's a very big problem for people who aren't in the middle but toward the bottom, because that's even worse, right? Yeah. And so that whole issue of like recreating the middle, and the most high-minded idea I've heard in conversations among our team, and you'll eventually get to a conversation where you'll find the team member who said this, that this idea of the personal experience, which again I think is very common in the modal age group that we're talking about, of watching your parents' generation or your generation be part of something that was hollowed out economically, and in terms of opportunity, and in terms of piled on more debt, all that stuff. These are real issues, okay? And I don't think that putting a bunch of flashbang stuff in there, like, be excited, you're now like in this stratospheric, you're an astronaut living in space, and you have more value than anything, or you have a thing that has more value than anything. I mean, vanity is always going to be there for us. Luxury will always be there.
Sex sells.
Well, yeah, all of that stuff. So, the sustainability issue has a lot to do with like delivering on this deep understanding that there are people who want the middle restored. And what if this is humanity's next chance to restore something that's been lost, or our last chance to restore something that is essential for survival? I mean, and that's where the dramatics come in, right? It's like, oh my God, you're being so over dramatic about it. It's like, I don't think so, man. Have you walked down the street? Have you visited a city? Have you talked to your neighbors? Have you seen what people are going through? Even people who are lucky are like, just decimated. And so, there's a part of this that is based on like having like a fire in you to help correct that. But the problem is, right, is that the closer you get to attention and broader attention, and people who potentially want to see it as a means of financial gain, which is okay, because it'll raise the whole slope of everything, right? At a certain point, historically, they don't want you to talk about changing the world.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so that's a crisis sometimes. And so the question is, how does it all come together? Now, this is actually a good time to pursue this. I mean, especially in these interviews that you're doing, right? Because we're taking art, story, and engineering, and marketing too, but not in a
Shill way.
Not in a shill way. And that's the whole point of it, is like, this is who we are.
Yeah. That's why I think the long form is awesome, because honestly, it's the side that I feel lucky to have been here when I was, because I got the chance to meet you guys. You're doing town halls so regularly that like we ended up talking a lot more about like outside stuff, or it was less a presentation, more a dialogue.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, because we had a conversation today where we have to bring that back. And I think that part of it is that we have gotten into a mode where we're doing so much and there's so much detail that it's very hard to protect people from it while also not feeling like we are hiding people from it, right? We don't want to do either, right? But, I mean, we don't want to hide behind anything.
That's the thing, is you're never going to get anything done if you're constantly trying to tell everybody every day an update on everything you did. It's just it's dumb.
Yes, it's dumb and it's overwhelming. So I think one of the challenges before us is that we actually need more we need to architect these town halls in a way so that there is more participation by people, so people don't feel so intimidated to get up. Now, whether that means, kind of fielding things and asking people ahead of time, say, hey, are you willing to get up, and express this thought?
And I think you got to have probably a room moderator or somebody, and even if I have to jump in and say it, but like, hey, this isn't a chance to like this is not going to be them presenting, or like this is a conversation, not a presentation.
Yes. Now, if that's something that you're willing to do, let me know. I mean, I'll bring it up, because I think it would be really good to have I mean, this is the thing that makes it difficult from the real life thing, right? I mean, going back to like one of your earlier questions about like what's changed and what is the same. Well, the problem is that the audience is so virtualized, right? There's nobody walking around with a microphone who can just like, like, like in the talk show days, like, and just walk through the audience because somebody's got a question and ask them, right? And then they can say it right then and there. I mean, you can't force people to raise their hands.
Yeah.
So that whole room moderator thing is, I mean, it's a real challenge. I haven't heard a solution for it yet, frankly.
I really do believe that the part that has kept things really going in the beginning is the same thing that would keep things going further on. Like, I will watch an interview on somebody I like, even if they're having a slightly less compelling story or something like that. There's an emotional reaction that you guys don't have because you're on the dev team that I feel from being kind of like in between the two spaces. Like I used to say, when you ask a question, it makes people more creative. Like, I've watched it make people more creative.
Right.
Just because you ask a question. So there is that like interaction magic. I don't know what it is. So I think you guys are doing fine on the 2 weeks, because like honestly, updates more than that would just be like convoluted. But like an hour or something like that in an all chill format. And this is that component of like,
works better on Discord. Do you think what you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm talking about an inside community thing, a Discord only thing.
Okay.
Just to be in the room. You don't even have to answer or ask questions or do any of it. It's just to be like, hey, for an hour, we're all going to hang out in here. Sometimes Froggy Digital riffs on like crypto stuff, and it like, I will stop talking. Like, it'll be like two frogs having a conversation. Somebody will jump in that knows crypto stuff. I'll just stop talking because I'm like, oh, this is fucking awesome, because two of the frogs that know crypto shit are talking to one of the devs that knows crypto shit, and I can just sit back and listen and learn something. And those are super cool, even if I'm being quiet.
Frogland presents All Chill, No Shill, a podcast born out of the desire to hear more than elevator pitches.